The Charlotte Podcast Festival is presented by Blumenthal Performing Arts, the Queen City Podcast Network, Eclex Creative Agency, and WFAE, Charlotte's NPR news source, the home of acclaimed podcast Charlotte Talks, She Says, The List, Amplifier, Southbound, and FAQ City. Learn more about WFAE and our latest podcast, Work It, at WFAE.org.
Hi, I'm Jadon Marshall. I'm the Chief Content Officer and Executive Vice President of WFAE. So as Joni mentioned, this is it, folks. This is the last panel of the Charlotte Podcast Festival. I want to start by thanking our partners at Eclex Creative Agency, the Blumenthal Performing Arts, the Queen City Podcast Network, all of our speakers, moderators, and you for creating such an amazing event. We've been blown away by the nearly 14,000 registrations from people all over the world. That's 14,000 opportunities for us to showcase why Charlotte creatives, arts organizations, and WFAE are such vital local resources. This festival represents WFAE's ongoing commitment to local storytelling. For the last 3 years, we've been encouraging and equipping people in our community, especially those who find themselves often underrepresented, to own their own narratives. We believe in the transformative power of storytelling to provide deeper understanding, to hold the powerful accountable, to build bridges and tear down walls, and even in some cases to bring healing. So for 3 years, we've provided these kinds of hands-on trainings and events free of charge to our community. And even though it's free for you, it's not for us. But for as long as we can, we want everyone to have access without a cost barrier. So if you've enjoyed this festival and you want to support the work of WFAE, please make a donation today at WFAE.org. Making an investment in us allows us to continue making an investment in our community. We're grateful for any amount. Lastly, I'm happy to announce that the winners of WFAE's Queen City PodQuest, which was our community podcasting contest, are launching their podcast, Work It, tomorrow. Be sure to subscribe as they capture so many great stories from people across all fields about how they find purpose or derive joy through their work. Go to WFAE.org/workit to learn more. Thank you again for your attendance and your support. Now, without further delay, I'll turn it back over to Joni for today's panel.
Thank you, Jadon, and thank you for being a great leader at WFAE. Everyone, welcome again to WFAE and our great partners, Charlotte Podcast Festival. As Jadon mentioned, my name is Joni. I'm going to be your moderator for the evening. I'm also going to be the person that is going to be helping bring about this conversation with our great session panelists tonight. Again, tonight we are concluding our month of 40 sessions of 60 award-winning speakers of conversations about anything related to podcasting with this session, this next hour, and it's titled The Art of Daily Talk. I can't think of a better way to conclude this month of Podtober, if you will. For more than 20 years, WFAE Charlotte Talks has been the region's best radio program and podcast for the daily discussion of politics, culture, entertainment, social issues, the environment, and beyond. So tonight, the big questions that we were going to pose to our panelists: what does it take to host and produce a daily talk show, especially when the news cycle never stands still, especially as we approach next Tuesday? Well, to share some expert insight and inspiration, we're so happy to be joined by two representatives, two members of Charlotte Talks' production team, award-winning production team, I should even add. We're joined by producer Chris Miller. Hi, Chris.
Hello, and thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here. And we're also joined by the host of Charlotte Talks, longstanding host of Charlotte Talks, Mike Collins. Hi, Mike.
He's sitting, though, not standing.
Yeah, but I am standing. I don't stand. Yes, hi. Welcome.
That's going to be one of the questions I ask you later, Mike,
Okay.
is what recommendation for a chair do you have? But again, for everyone joining us, thank you for being here for this, our final informational training session of the Charlotte Podcast Festival. Before we get started with the conversation, just a few housekeeping tips. We're going to have a great conversation, no doubt. We look forward to answering your questions from the audience. So we are going to ask that your audio remains muted for the session, but by all means, if you have any questions for Mike, for Chris, about how to create daily audio, a talk show, make sure to put your questions in the Zoom chat, and we'll get around to it towards the end of the program. So again, any questions you have, no matter how big or small they are, put them in the chat box. We'll get around to them towards the end of the hour. A reminder to our audience as well, tonight's session, along with all the other sessions from the past month, will be made available at the end of the month, which is this Saturday. So make sure to check your emails for the link to tonight's session and all the other sessions tomorrow. And by tomorrow, I mean Saturday. And you can also get social with us on social media. You can use the hashtag CLT Podcast Fest to share your experience. You can also tag us at WFAE and also at Charlotte Talks for our speakers tonight. So with that said, let's go ahead and get started. So Mike and Chris, I don't know if you're seeing the chat, but we have a number of people joining us tonight who are not from Charlotte, not based in North Carolina, ranging from Antarctica to Egypt. So international audience members tonight. I'd love to be able to provide some context to them about what Charlotte Talks is and how it came to be. So Mike, if you can get us started in kind of sharing with us the creation of Charlotte Talks.
Sure. We've been on the air since 1998, so it's a long time ago. And I had done a public radio television program years before, but I came directly from commercial radio. And it was about 3 years after WFAE had adopted the NPR talk format. And I thought that station needs a local talk show. So it took me a year to talk the powers that be at WFAE into allowing me to do the show. And what my idea was I wanted it to be the talk show of record, whatever that means. To me, it meant if people were talking about something in Charlotte, we were talking about it on the air. If you needed to know more about something, we were going to be talking about it, whether it's going to be politics or the arts or sports or a myriad of other things, music, etc. We were going to be talking about it. And although we are more on the news today than we ever have been, that's only because the program, any program on the air, 22 years is going to change. We've made that transition because that's where radio, we think, needs to go right now. Podcasts have killed the kind of radio we started out doing on Charlotte Talks, where we had these long form conversations with people and these NPR driveway moments. If you're not from America, then you don't know what that is. But NPR likes to say, well, with us, we're so interesting and so exciting that if we've gotten to the point where you need to get out of the car, you don't. You stay and you listen to finish the conversation. But the truth is, those are the kind of conversations that really need to be on podcasts now, because you can stop and start. Our stuff is very topical now, and so you can catch the replay, you can catch our podcast, but we're just on what's happening right now.
So I think that provides some inspiration to our audience then, the fact that you simply pitched your idea to WFAE more than 20 years ago for it to become a show. So not to say that works for everyone here in the audience wanting to have a daily talk show, a daily podcast, a daily radio program, but it takes a little bit of chutzpah to do that and also some great strategy. So I'm going to bring Chris back in. Chris, share a little bit about your experience with Charlotte Talks. You are an audiophile. You love radio. You love broadcast journalism. So you've been following Charlotte Talks even before you joined the program as a producer.
And I tell Mike this often to remind him how long he's been in the market and how old he is, the station that he referenced, I also worked there. We didn't work at the same time, but we spent about the same number of years there. I was there for about 14 years doing news and did everything you could do there. So after a while, I wanted to try something new. I had been a fan of Mike's for a long time. I mentioned in a Facebook post earlier today that my first broadcasting was when my dad would call up Mike's show to riff on whatever it was that Mike was getting calls on, and I would make a racket in the background so I could hear myself on the radio. That was my first broadcasting, and it was on Mike's show. And that's how I got the job. I knew of Charlotte Talks as being the show that Mike referenced it, of being the show of record. When I was at this other station, I would frequently in my reporting and in my newscasts reference something that Mike had been saying or had gotten a guest to say on Charlotte Talks because it was making news. something the mayor at the time had said, or something the governor, the city manager, or someone who was coming on Charlotte Talks was saying something newsworthy. And so I'd always been a fan of the show. And when I was looking for a new opportunity, I've been trying to get to WFAE for the better part of a decade. And this opportunity opened up. And it was coming at a time, as Mike mentioned, that not the format of the show, but the approach of topics was evolving to being newsier. And so it just fit that I had this news background where I could where I had this background in getting audio of newsmakers to use in conversations that we have with other guests to help illustrate and drive home points. And it's worked, at least in my opinion, it's worked out. I don't know if Mike has a different opinion on my
well, you're still hired. You're still gainfully employed. So I think that's probably a good indication.
And I think just to go off something Mike just said there, I don't think that podcasting has killed our show or
it's changed.
Or radio. I think the key to, and maybe we'll get into this later, is the difference between our type of show. Well, we have a conversation. Mike knows how to keep a conversation going. I think that's why it has made it a successful radio show. That's why it's listenable as a podcast, but that's what it has helped it keep going for 22 years, is because Mike has a conversation with people. He doesn't just come in with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 questions and we go paint by numbers through the show with a pre-written script. He has a back and forth with the guest. And I think that has been the biggest reason why the show has stuck around as long as it has.
And I think part of why we're having this conversation tonight with the two of you is that the roots of podcasting, the successful roots, the engaging roots that create communities and conversations, it stems from broadcast radio and programs like Charlotte Talks. I mean, there's a reason why Terry Gross is considered one of the best interviewers out there, given her longstanding work with Fresh Air, which is produced by NPR and WHYY in Philadelphia. There wouldn't really be a Joe Rogan. There would really be other, long-term or long-standing or even new-coming podcast hosts were not for the people on radio. So Chris, I want to kind of dive in a little bit about your work with Charlotte Talks, because as a producer, one of your roles, along with your team of producers, is to bring an idea for a topic or a show to life that then Mike host with guests. So walk us through that evolution of a show topic from the point that you pitch it to the point that people can listen to it, whether on air or in Charlotte Talks' podcast feed.
I don't think this is universal in public radio, but I appreciate the amount of autonomy that we have as producers in crafting topics. Certainly, we're mindful of current events, and making sure that we're not leaving something shortchanged that we think the audience needs to hear about. But apart from news topics, our guiding principle when we try to come up with a show topic is this interesting, and sometimes it's just we consume so much news on staff. We're all day we're just digesting local news and national news, and after a while you'll see trends in the news and you'll say, well, let's spend a little more time on that. That's interesting, right? And we'll all bounce off ideas off each other, and we'll come back to Mike and we'll say, we're doing this show. I think Mike trusts us that we would not present him a lousy topic. That's why I think we're unique in the public radio world, that it's not a top-down type show, that he has the confidence in us to come up with topics that he can keep the listeners engaged in. Sure, we can give him any topic, sure, and he would knock it out of the park. He's a great interviewer, but the key is a topic that's going to keep the audience engaged, because the producers, we're people too. We're consumers of podcasts, and we listen to the things that interest us. So we just gauge things on how interesting things are to us, and we just assume that it's going to be interesting to the audience as well.
Well, I would just add that I think the production team deserves a little bit more credit than that, because there are points where I'm sure you've been working weeks or even months on a topic on a pitch, and then all of a sudden when it comes together, it is right on the pulse. It is feeling exactly what the national conversation is or a local conversation.
Absolutely, yeah. And we'll plot out on our calendar, because outside of 2020, you can kind of see, news comes and goes in seasons. That it's okay. It's political season right now. It's back to school. People are more engaged on certain topics, and you kind of you become more in tune on what topics keep engagement. And so we'll plot out on our calendar. Okay, well in June let's try to talk to the superintendent. So it's not like where it's Friday afternoon, we got to figure out what we're doing on Monday. It's, we take time to kind of plot out when to strike, when the iron's hot, when we think that this will be the right time to talk about something.
The other thing that is frustrating for the producers is they'll work to get these shows together, and we usually book at least 2, maybe 3, possibly 4 guests, or maybe we'll have a guest change in the middle, and then the night before that show is set to air, something happens in the news and we don't do that show. We do a different show. So that's frustrating for all of us, but particularly for those guys, because not only do they have to book a new show, they have to figure out, well, does this have legs next week or tomorrow, the day after tomorrow?
And the perfect example is Justice Ginsburg's death. I've kind of taken lead on our show on producing political topics. And so Friday night, we'd already had Monday's show booked on a political topic, but, you sit there and you think, well, I think the audience I think they need an outlet for just getting off their chest their feelings about the justice death. So we scrap what we have planned and we get to work very quickly on booking people. And the good thing about being on a show that's been around so long is you have kind of an internal Rolodex of people who can talk about something. So you right away, okay, these are local voices who we know would be great to include in a conversation about this. So that's another thing that when we have to crash book a show is just getting right to work. And I put out, we only have room for maybe 3 or 4 guests, but I immediately put out requests to, a dozen people and saying, hey, what are you doing 9 o'clock on Monday morning? We need your opinion. We need your expertise on this. So yeah, it can pivot very quickly.
Chris, you actually bring up a great question, which I'd love to learn more about, which is about guests. Because Charlotte Talks, while the name implies that it's always about Charlotte or only with Charlotte area experts, over the years, you all have had national and international guests, whether it's, reporters from the New York Times, award-winning authors, Broadway stars, scientists, you name it. So tell us a little bit about booking those shows with different guests and the art of getting the yes from them.
Mm-hmm. Well, frankly, a lot of the times it's because people have something they need. They have merchandise they want to move or tickets they push. And they know the audience they can reach by coming on Charlotte Talks. But a good example is recently, oh gosh, it's time spans are crushed now. But within a span of a couple of weeks or months, we had on the show James Comey and Bob Woodward. And in passing off the air, they, made comments to Mike about, I looked you up before I agreed to do this interview, and yeah, you're the type of show that I want to do an interview with. So the foundation of getting those guests is the reputation of the host. Especially now, the internet being what it is, one bad guest can give you a bad rep around the world. So it was great that Mike has this reputation, but also what I usually lead off with when I make a pitch to a guest or try to get someone is reinforcing that we're the NPR affiliate in Charlotte, because we need that branding, I guess, to let them know this is just not the Joe Schmo show, that this is the local news program in Charlotte that is affiliated with NPR. And that really helps open a lot of doors, because guests will know that we're going to give them time to have a conversation, that they're not going to have to speed through answers and condense the whatever topic they want to talk about into a 5-minute segment. We know that we're going to give them a lot of airtime to have a conversation with the host. So the biggest key is reinforcing that we're the public radio station, the NPR affiliate, when we try to get bigger guests that are, like you said, the national experts, the scientists, the stars, that kind of thing.
Yeah. But Mike, I mean, the reputation of Charlotte Talks, yes, now that you've been around for more than 20 years, it's easier because you have thousands of guests who've been on the show, you have recognition from awards to press, you name it. But at the start of Charlotte Talks' run, was it really that simple to bring on the politicians, to bring on the national starlets, if you will?
Well, I had been on radio and television here in Charlotte for 13 years before. So I had a reputation in the city, in the market. And then, of course, NPR has its reputation of treating people fairly and giving you time, like Chris just said. So our very first show was with local politicians. The very first show was with them. And I was kind of calling in some favors, and we had the mayor on, and then later on we'd get the governor because I knew the governor, and things like that. But and we only had one producer back then who worked all night at a full-time job. So that was difficult, but I didn't want to hear about how difficult it was. Just have somebody show up at 9 o'clock and we'll talk to them. But now we have 4 producers and a reputation, and NPR has a reputation, and it's just become, it's not always easy because we're more particular now than we used to be, but it helps.
No, and we're very particular. I don't say that in a bragging way, but we only have 5 hours a week, and great that you were coming into town. That's a really interesting thing, but that 2020 is happening right now.
Right.
We're in an election year, so we do have to tell people really that is interesting, but we have a bigger service in talking about what's these other things right now.
Yeah. Well, before we talk more about 2020 and what that's meant for the news cycle and also for the production of daily program Charlotte Talks, a reminder to the audience that you're more than welcome to ask any questions to Mike and Chris. We'll be answering your questions just in about 20 minutes later on in the program. But before we get into it, I do want to touch again on the idea of the reputation and building it and having an established rapport with your audience, but also with people that you're booking. So to you all, what are the keys to success when it comes to establishing yourself, aside from the NPR branding, aside from knowing previous guests? How do you create that standard and establish it so that the guests feel like this is the show I want to be on now and in the future?
Can I go first, Chris?
Of course.
Please.
I do a lot of homework, a lot of homework, hours a day of homework. I read a voluminous amount of stuff that pertains to the topic and the guest, because I always say I know nothing. And I always say that I am cramming for the final exam for a course I never attended every day. And so when I go in there, I ask a lot of questions that I already know the answers to because I've read all this material. I'm often surprised. Sometimes they don't say what I think they're going to say, but they know almost immediately that I am not winging it. I really have a plan for the show, where I think it ought to go, where I want it to go, but I let it go where it goes. So if they say something that I could not possibly have anticipated, they're going to say, I let them go off onto that tangent until I need to bring it back to where I think it ought to go. And I think they're lulled into this sense that it's a conversation, and it is a conversation because I'll allow that to happen. But I have a plan. I have a roadmap, and I've done a lot of work on that roadmap the day before. We had, I was going to bring up somebody that I talked to who It was a sports figure.
Yeah, I was about to say, tell the Bill Russell story.
The Bill Russell. I can never remember his name, but he's a very famous basketball player, played for the Celtics, and he was well out of his playing years when he came through, but he came through town with a book he had just written. And back in the early days of this program, we had a lot of authors on, and I read every one of their books. And sometimes we did 2 or 3 books a week. I don't do that anymore because I suddenly discovered my life is sitting in that chair reading books. So we don't do that. But back then I did. And he came on, and I know nothing about sports. Zip. Nothing. It's embarrassing. And I came into the studio. He couldn't do the 9 o'clock live, so we had to tape the show the day before. And I walked in and I said, Mr. Russell, nice to meet you. This is going to be a different interview than you've ever done before because I know nothing about sports. We're just going to talk about you and your book and your playing years, etc. And so you won't be bored. And his response to that was, and I quote, that was it. And I made a couple of little small talk things, and he kept doing that same thing. And I got on we rolled tape. I read the introduction. I asked the first question, and I got or a monosyllabic answer to a question that did not have a monosyllabic answer. And this went on for a while.
I went back and listened to the tape for our 20th anniversary show. And when Mike says, nice to have you here, Bill Russell says, okay.
Flop sweat is breaking out. Yeah. And we had already promoted the fact that it's going to be on the air, and it's an hour. So I'm thinking, oh my God. And finally, I just thought, what have I got to lose? I said, Mr. Russell, I read your book, and in your book, you talk a lot about how your mama taught you to be a man and a nice guy and treat other people with respect. Would she be happy with you right now? And because I said that, he knew I'd read his book, and he changed completely. It was a great conversation.
It sounds like, Mike, in this case, and likewise for other episodes and broadcasts you've done, one of the keys in establishing yourself and that reputation is preparation, is the respect shown in doing the research and knowing who your guest is, so that when they come in, they're not only feeling comfortable about them, but they know the care put into it.
Yeah.
Chris, what else would you add to that? And when it comes to the reputation of Charlotte Talks and how it's grown over the years?
Well, I think it's what Mike has just said, that doing the homework makes a big difference, because I think folks who go through the media circuit can tell right away who is just filling airtime and who is really interested in what you have to say. And so I think it's just everything Mike has said.
Well, Joni, you just used the word respect, and I think that's a lot of it. I think when they realize that you've done your homework, you are respecting them. And from the very beginning of this program, one of the goals that I wanted to do was to make the best use of the listener's time and the best use of the guest's time. And the only way you can do that is to prepare. And Chris will tell you, and producers will on the show will tell you, I will talk or take the segment right to the edge when we have to break. I don't let any extraneous music go off into play in the ether for 20 seconds, because to me that is a waste of time. Let us maximize our time with this person sitting on the other side of the microphone. Let us maximize the listener's attention span with getting them as much information about this topic, this guest, as we possibly can. That's been my approach from the very beginning.
Mike, for those who may not know the process of researching the show, would you happen to have on you nearby your desk maybe one of those pitch packets so they can get a sense of how much information is brought to a show?
Everything is virtual now. I used to get a packet, hold on a second. I used to get a packet every day.
They were usually
about that there.
Yeah, 2-3 inches of material,
like
depending on the topic.
But everything since the pandemic hit, everything is now virtual. It's all links on an email. But I'll pull out a show. This is Wednesday's show, and it is 6 pages of questions that I have written out for these people.
Because nothing's happening on Tuesday.
Well, I could pull out Tuesday's show. Tomorrow's show is 9 pages long. I won't get to all of them. Some of them will go by the wayside. I don't necessarily ask them what I wrote on the page is not necessarily what comes out of my mouth, but it allows me to know where it gives me place setters. I know I want to ask about this. And then they start talking about the previous question, and I'll do follow-ups that are not on the page. Because I'm listening. You got to listen. That's the most important thing, is listening. But this gives me a roadmap of where the topics I'd like to cover, the subject areas within those topics that I think are important. I'll have notes about, maybe we've pulled quotes because they've supplied me with articles these people have written or sections of their book. I'll go through sections of their book and pull out things that I think are interesting and quote them so that they can respond to, expand on what they were already saying. So it's a lot of paper every day. I'm a paper guy. I love paper. But now that luckily I have a 38-inch screen here because I have the email with all the links on it over here, and then I've got my document that I'm writing on over here, and then I've got all the things that pop up when you click on the links, and it takes about 4 hours. But fewer trees.
If only Dunder Mifflin were a real company. I think
That's right.
A great sponsor of Charlotte Talks and Mike Collins' work. Actually, this brings up a great transition to really, I think, what's on a lot of people's minds, which is making audio during a pandemic. So again, for anyone who does have questions for Mike and Chris about the creation of a daily talk show or daily audio program, feel free to keep putting them in the comments. We'll get to them in a bit. But for the next bit that we have together, Chris and Mike, I'd love to focus on what Charlotte Talks has been like for the last 7-8 months during this pandemic. It'd be putting in the most PG of terms to say it's been an interesting year. Right. So how has the program changed since March when the pandemic hit Charlotte, North Carolina?
We have not been in the studio since March. The one producer goes in every day to run the controls for the show and to bring the guests into the Zoom chat and Zoom conversation. But I'm sitting in this room doing my part of it, and then I'm talking to everybody on Zoom. I love it. I liked it when we were in the studio because I really like to look at you. When I talk to you, I get a lot of physical cues from looking at your face and your body language. And with Zoom, you get at least this much of body language, so I can still see you. It's better than doing an interview on a telephone or having somebody do what we used to do. If you couldn't come to Charlotte, we would find you a studio someplace to go to, so you sounded like you were in a radio studio, because you were. But I couldn't see you. This is better because I can see everybody and we can talk to each other off the air. And I don't know how long we'll do this after it's over, after things get back to normal this way, because we are making allowances for barking dogs and children to run into the room and things to fall off the wall and phones to ring in the background, which we would never have tolerated in the past, but everybody's doing it, so everybody has a tolerance for it now.
Right.
But I like it, and I don't know from a producer standpoint, Chris, whether it's easier for you. It must be easier for you because it's much easier for guests to roll out of bed in their pajamas and walk to their computer and talk to us at 9 a.m., particularly if you're on the West Coast and it's 6 a.m., than it is to drive to a studio or even pick up a phone or come into our studio. It's much easier. Chris?
It's easy. I feel like I'm on your show. It's easier. It's easier here at the end of October than it was early on when everybody was still figuring out Zoom, figuring out virtual meetings, figuring out how their own work lives were reacting to this. We had a couple of weeks of trial and error. Before the pandemic, we had brought Skype into the equation. If you were not able to get to a studio or unwilling to go to a studio, we still wanted some kind of better quality than a phone line. And Skype was hit and miss. So we tried that for a while. We tried, I think we tried Google Meetings, Google Hangouts for a couple of shows. And then as the world shifted to Zoom, we tried Zoom, and we just landed on something that helped.
And it works.
And works, but even still, everyone around the world had a learning curve with it.
Right.
We're much more comfortable with it now at the end of October than previously. And Mike stole my answer because we prearranged this, but it is easier to book people now, because if you're in Washington, we don't ask you to endure Washington traffic to get to NPR headquarters so you can be on the radio with us. If you're a guest, there was a guest I had to convince who was out on Martha's Vineyard once to go to the local nothing NPR station there that plays classical music to arrange an interview. It's so much easier to get to make these connections because people are more comfortable with it in their everyday lives now. It's what's made it a little more difficult is in giving our digital packets to Mike now. And Mike, as he referenced, we would give him folders of material every day so that he could have every conceivable thing he would want to know about this topic provided to him, or every possible thing this guest might want to talk about or answer they might have. We needed him to have that material. We would be able to write notes and say, hey, pay attention to this is the most important thing to talk about. We don't have that really anymore. It's just sometimes just a litany of links and headlines and me providing notes saying, hey, this is, sometimes my notes are as long as the news article that I'm sending him because I'm trying to distill, earlier this week we had a show on all the court action going on surrounding the election, and I literally gave myself a headache the Friday before the Monday show trying to condense legal matters into a coherent packet so that Mike could sound intelligent. So I suffer for you, Mike. Now, so that Mike could be the best audience advocate that he could be for that topic.
Yeah, it's that part of it, even for me, is a little more difficult. I still prefer paper. You can't highlight. You can't put highlights in links, and they would go through a lot of these articles and highlight the key parts. So now they will usually write a note underneath the link and say that's either a quote that I'll look for, or they'll say the gist of this is blah 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 blah. Look for that. So there's a lot of work that goes into that, and it's a little harder now than it was. But the actual doing of the broadcast is as easy or easier.
And I think what you're getting at with your question, Joni, is how has not the behind the scenes machinations of the show, but the program itself, the response it's had. I was just going looking at our calendar back in March when everything went kablooey, that and this goes back to something I said earlier. We use our kind of internal gauges of like, this is serious. We need to scrap some things we have on the calendar and devote some time to this, because the last in-studio guest we had was our Mecklenburg County manager, and we recently played back the tape on a recent show with her. The question was, and I'm paraphrasing, what's up with this coronavirus? I see the county has like 2 cases now. Is this really gonna? And what do you think about this? And then we spent the rest of the hour talking about the census. And we just pivot, because that's what's now expected of our show, is that when things hit the fan, we need to be the vehicle for the audience to get their questions answered. So we went immediately booking, medical experts we have, and we're fortunate in the Charlotte area to have a lot of medical experts, and in North Carolina broadly to have medical experts at our disposal. And we take a step back and we say, okay, what are some of the subtopics in this overarching topic of COVID? Yeah. So in like the first week we had, what are your questions about COVID so we can get explained? How do we talk to kids about this? How are the school systems reacting to this? So you don't try to cram everything of this crisis into 1 hour. You give the audience the I don't know the word, but the ability to spread out the topics.
You end up doing series, and over the years, by default, actually, we have become the only place you can find long form information on a local level. You can hear national stuff from NPR, you can hear national news on PBS, but local news covers these topics, but they do it in 2 minutes or 90 seconds or one soundbite of 5 words, and we are on for an hour and really get in depth with it.
I think that's actually a great point of inspiration for anyone out there who, no matter the topic, no matter the genre or kind of podcast you're making, is the idea that you don't have to make a 10-hour, 1-episode show so that you feel as if you're including every single talking point or perspective in that one episode, and that it is perfectly fine to go, for one episode talking about one part of it. And that way you're, again, to Mike's point earlier, maximizing the time that you have with that guest or with that audience.
And I think that's one of the strengths of podcasts, aside from the fact that you can stop and start and pick up where you left off as a listener, is that you don't have to be exactly whatever we are. What are we, Chris? 48 minutes?
48 and a half minutes.
48 and a half. You don't, and it has to be exact. We can't end early. We can't end late. And we have 2 breaks in the program. We've got to get to those breaks precisely on time. So you have that flexibility of, okay, if it's interesting for 38 minutes, but not 39, you can stop. We can't. And that's the first question I always ask of the producers. Is this an hour? Can we cover this in an hour, or do we? And if it's not an hour, what's the second part of the show going to be about? So I think that's one of the nice things about podcasting. You take it where you think you ought to take it, and when it's done, it's done.
Yeah. This news cycle, we're still in it. It's not going to end anytime soon, especially after next week. This year in particular, for the last 7-8 months, it feels as if we've packed a decade's worth of knowledge and breaking news updates, again, into just a shorter period of time. How difficult has it been for Charlotte Talks to try to plan and book shows when the news, again, over the pandemic, when we're all working remotely, when this news just feels like it's not quitting, it's not letting up, it's not going one path and only that one path?
Well, fortunately, we're not the nation's capital talks. We're Charlotte Talks, because I don't know how you would follow the president's news cycle on an hour-long talk show, because by the time you get 20 minutes into it, the news cycle has changed, and the news of the day has changed. We have 4 producers. They're reading everything all the time. We try to be as on point as we can be, and we have the permission to, and the mandate actually now, to change the show. It used to be, when we first started, if it was Monday and we were doing a show on whatever, and a plane crashed outside the studio, we would continue with that show, because by God, that's what we had planned to do. Right. Now we shuffle, we get people on the phone, we get people on Zoom, and we move into that area if we have to. It is more difficult, and I don't know how we plan it out. The producers, we have a calendar that we have topics and show guests booked weeks in advance sometimes, or at least a week in advance. But those things shuffle all the time. So that's on the producers, and to a degree on me, because if I've already started prepping, I don't like to start over again, but you do.
And in years like this, when we are Charlotte Talks, and as Mike said, we're not the nation talks or whatever. What's beneficial to being a local program is that we have more of an immediate connection with our audience. And because we live here, we know what interests the community, because we know who the community leaders are, who the organizations in town are. And I think we hear from them when they'll tell us enough, and
they'll tell you over email, they'll tell you over social media.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm trying to be flippant. It's that, after, and it's quaint to think of this now month 7 of this, but at the end of March, we felt internally that, okay, we're getting burned out on this. What is something else we can talk about that can, at least for 48 and a half minutes, give us a distraction from the rest of the world right now?
Right.
So I think that's another service that we try to provide, is that, everything is happening GIF waving arms gif is happening, but there are other things going on right now. And I think that's one of the pluses of public radio, that we don't have to approach things like cable news and just have the ticker going 24 hours, that we're only going to talk about this one thing that's going to get you pissed off. It's, we serve a different mission, and it's to be a public service. And that takes on a lot of different forms. When a plane crashes, we'll bring you the local emergency information. We had a tropical storm roll through here today, and our news department kept listeners aware of it. But that service can also mean taking your mind off something for a while, something as heavy as what we're living through right now. So just because we're a news program, we don't have to wear blinders to something just because it's not page one of the New York Times that day, or the Charlotte Observer that day. That we can try to look at other things that are happening.
Yeah. Chris, you mentioned the B word, which is burnout. And whether you're working in news, or we have a lot of folks here that work in different lines of work, podcasting is more of a hobby, regardless of where you are and what you do, burnout, resilience, there are all these words are popping up from the last 7 months of working through pandemic. And a colleague of mine made a comment very recently that I think hits home. It's not that we're working from home, it's that we're living at work. Yep. And I'm wondering, for the two of you, just how are you handling this new normal, with you recording from home, producing from home, while also having to balance out a personal life and not being burnt out by the day-to-day grind of news?
Well, even before the pandemic, I worked from home except to do the show. I would come home and do the prep because I didn't work in the building. And just before the pandemic, we were about to get space exclusively for Charlotte Talks away from the station downtown in Charlotte. We already did our show from an arts center downtown. We were going to get exclusive space that was going to be ours, and we would never see you guys because we wouldn't be in the same building. So for me, it hasn't been a big deal. I've always worked until the work is done, because if you're in broadcasting, there are two things, there are always going to be deadlines, and you cannot miss the deadlines, period. No excuses. You come to work sick, because if you've done the prep on a show that like we do, and you're sick that morning, you just can't hand that off to a substitute host who doesn't know anything about it. You come to work sick. It's just how it is. And so you build up some kind of a mental callus. You build up mental calluses in broadcasting. You work holidays, you work weekends. I've been in this business since 1972, and I have always worked 6 days a week, always. And for 5 years, when I was in television and radio at the other station, I worked 7 days a week for 5 years, because there were things on television that I wanted to do, and the only way I could do it was to work 7 days a week. I'm nuts. But so I kind of thrive on it, and I thrive on compartmentalization. When I can put things in their little box and put them over here for a while.
Yeah. Hey, Chris, from your perspective, is this sustainable? Is this something that's these mental calluses that you're able to go through yourself?
It is. And it's not the same for everybody. I mean, everyone's going to have different levels of interaction that they want to have with other people. I think Mike touched on something that, that I learned from one of my mentors, is that you've got to, when you're working, you've got to compartmentalize. Yes, the pandemic affects me. The election affects me. Everything that we're producing affects me, but I've got to compartmentalize. I have to deal with that later. From 9 to 10, I got to be on the stick. I've got to focus on what the public is expecting of this program. Outside of that, I've had to teach myself how to separate what is work here at home. I'm at home right now, and what is home. My wife is working from home. We've been here for 7 months, and I think, just on a personal note, what has made that sustainable is we just kind of we're just tunnel vision for 8 hours for the most part, and we just focus on our work. It's funny that when I was at the office and she was at her office, we would talk on Google Hangouts all day. We don't do that anymore, even though we're 5 feet from each other. But the dining room table has become the office, and on Fridays we just had to tell ourselves, okay, work is done for the week, so we have to take all the stuff off the table so that we don't have that visual still there that tempts me to say, okay, well, I know it's Saturday, the kid's napping, I could send out an email to someone to see what they're doing in a couple of weeks. See if I've got to you have to train yourself to just say, that'll still be there on Monday morning. That email will still be there tomorrow. And that's tough, because I think the work ethic in this industry, as Mike said, is that you pound the pavement all the time to get work done. So it's an adjustment.
Yeah. I think at times it can feel like a race when you never necessarily signed up for a race to begin with. You signed up more for a walk.
And part of the problem of this whatever you want to call we're living through right now is that you'll have a good idea in the middle of the night, and you feel like unless you go and work on that right now, that you're going to lose it by tomorrow morning. You will have no memory of what that was. And that's tough as a producer to turn that switch off, because I'm guilty of always being in producer mode of, we'll be watching something and a guest will be on it, or somebody will be on the program, and I thought, oh, I should try to get that person. I wonder how I can. And my focus shifts away from whatever program we're watching to, okay, how do I get on my phone and I find out who the rep is for that person? What's their Gmail? What's their Twitter? What's the best way I can get in touch with this person? So that can be tough sometimes, because the show is always hanging over you. That you feel like you've got to keep the show fed.
And I'm always scared, always. I don't know that they understand this, but I ask a lot of questions when we have our post-show meeting about the next show or next couple of shows. And I seem like an unenthusiastic participant. And most of that is because, well, there's several reasons, but one of which is we've been on for 22 years or whatever the hell it is. And
language.
And if it's a show that we have done before or 10 times before, and
right.
Because you can't not repeat the same topic in a town the size of Charlotte.
We have 5 shows a week, and
right. Then what is it that we can bring to this version of this topic that we haven't done before? And if we can't answer that question and we really want to do that topic, let's play back the recording. Yeah. And the other thing is, I'm scared because there's no place to hide. It's public radio. And commercial radio, you can break for a commercial if things aren't going well, or if you need to regroup, or you realize what you had planned to do is not going to work. You break for a commercial, you think about it for 3 minutes, you come back and you're okay, you're back in the game. I can't do that. I got no place to hide. So I'm always afraid before the show starts. I'm always afraid during the show, because I know we can't go off the air because I screwed up. We have to keep going. So there's that fear element. And you'd think that after doing this for so long, I would be okay, but I'm not.
Mike, you're just like us. You're human.
Yeah.
And to the point of things sometimes feeling repetitive, it's a tough tightrope to walk, because we're a growing city. So we have people who are just being introduced to Charlotte Talks, but we have people who have been with the show for years and know this topic like the back of their hand. So we have to find a way to serve both the people who are new to the community and the challenges we're facing, and the long timers. It's not easy. And sometimes you just have to accept that yes, this is the 5th show we've done this year on affordable housing or something, but you just have to keep at the back of your mind that people are still being introduced to Charlotte Talks on a daily basis that have never heard of us before.
And we have also adopted this philosophy. I don't think we have failed ever. We have done better shows and worse shows, but we have been given permission to fail by upper management. Try things. If they work, terrific. If they don't, okay, you tried, move on.
Yeah.
So there's some relief in that.
Yeah, I think the idea of failing fast, fail quick, fail fast,
Yep.
move on, pivot. Folks, in the last few minutes we have together this hour, I want to be mindful of everyone's time. We do have a few audience questions I'd love to bring
Yes.
into the conversation. So one that we're getting a few different queries about is, Mike, about your at-home studio setup. So tell us a little bit about the headset, the microphone,
Well,
the plaid shirt you're wearing, all of that.
this is a Logitech headset. I do not use it on the show. I swing this over. This is a what kind of a mic is this? It's an RE20. I used to know all these microphones and all the equipment by number. I don't anymore, but this is an RE20 that plugs into a little Comrex box over here. And this is how my sound gets back with audio, with professional studio quality audio to the studio through this Comrex box, which is wired directly into my internet connection. And then I use these Sony headsets right here, which are really nice headsets. I like them, but I don't use this. I have no idea what this even sounds like on the air, but I see these comments saying, what's he using? Do they sound good? Okay.
Yeah, it sounds great. Yeah. And in fact, for those also wondering, my hair is hiding it, but I am also using a Logitech headset. Again, my hair is hiding it. You can barely see it. Beautiful part of having big curly hair.
During our show, Mike often gets confused as a drive-through worker, and people ask him for a burger too. So.
That's right.
Hey, but on that note, a cheap plug here. One of our regular fill-in hosts is a professor here in town, and he has been doing a lot of remote broadcasting because he's such a well-known political expert in town and the region. He uses a Blue Yeti microphone.
Yes.
When he fills in on the show, and because he's broadcasting remotely too. We don't. Yes, it is Bowtie Politics. It is Michael Bitzer. Correct. You get a shirt. That quality sounds almost as good as being in the studio. Because we've had a wide range of people's at home and makeshift setups, and that has been the most consistently good sounding microphone has been the Blue Yeti.
We have a question here from Redacted Radio, who shared earlier that he, or they, I should say, are coming at us from Antarctica tonight.
How's the weather?
Hopefully they'll respond to that in the comments. But they're wondering how many people are really needed to staff a show like Charlotte Talks. Mike, you've gone through the progression of the show from when it was you and one producer to now where Chris, along with a team, are helping. So what difference does it make?
I think you need at least 3 because we're on 5 days a week. We produce an original hour 5 days a week. You need at least 3. We have 4, and we have 4 because our executive producer has a lot of other responsibilities at the station in addition to just being the lead producer on our show and also an advocate for our show within the station at large. Because if you don't, you will burn out your producers.
Yeah.
One of the things that I have noticed is that we've been on the air a long time, and we've kept producers for a very long time. I'm not sure what that's about. Usually producers, God love them. I mean, usually producers last a year, 18 months, and then they move on to something else. And our producers, some of them have been with us for years. Wendy, our executive producer, has been with us for almost the whole run of the show, except for the first year and a half. And she's still here. It's because I'm so nice. But you just can't do it without. You can't do 5 original hours a week and we do it every week of the year.
Yeah.
I mean, I may take a week off, but there'll be other hosts who come in. They have to be produced.
Yeah.
So.
I think that brings up maybe a final question then for the two of you, just in out of respect for time. The title of tonight's session, our final session of the Charlotte Podcast Festival, is The Art of Daily Talk. There are a lot of popular daily talk shows or podcasts out there currently. Michael Barbaro with The Daily, and you've interviewed Michael on Charlotte Talks. You have, Up First from NPR. I mean, the list goes on. So for those that are joining us tonight that maybe were interested in attending because they do, or they currently are making daily audio, what advice would you give to them as they continue or they're about to embark on this journey?
I think you have to have confidence in yourself. I think I don't know, it depends on what your topic is and what your podcast is about. But if you are interested in something, chances are a lot of other people are too. And not every podcast is serious. Some podcasts are, and some radio shows are more comedic. And we have a kind of a balance of that. I produce a local comedy show once a year for the Performing Arts Center. So I have a jaded sense of humor, which I'll let show through sometimes, not like I used to, but sometimes. But I think the key is doing preparation, having a plan, executing the plan, having the confidence to let the plan go off track if you think it's better than what you planned, and then to listen, because what's being said to you is going to give you more questions than you could possibly have thought of. And it also makes for a conversation. And I think conversations are more interesting than, here's my question, there's the answer. Oh, here's my other question. It has no relation to what you just said, but I'm going to ask it anyway. I think conversations are human, and that's why I've taken that approach.
And Chris, final thoughts for the audience tonight as they perhaps want to follow in Charlotte Talk's footsteps?
I agree with the previous caller. The key is listening, because, and I was noticing this, and this is not a slight on them, but there's another network program on our station that follows ours, and it's different. There's a difference between, and no, I'm not trying to be funny, that there's a difference between a conversation and an interview. And they do an interview where it's, these are my questions. Whereas with a conversation, you wade into the subject. You don't just go right for it. It's, you have to set the table and what you want to accomplish over the course of the conversation. You need to go into it thinking, what do I want to do with this however much time I have with this one person. And who cares? And again, I'm not being flippant. It's like, who cares what this person has to say? Like, what can the audience take away from this person's insight on something? And just remember that there are people that are listening that know about the topic you're talking about. Mm-hmm. That you need to be aware that you're not the end all be all on something, so you've got to prove that you bring something to the table that they might not already know.
Can I add to that? I've always felt, even when I was doing commercial radio, is that it's not about me, particularly when you're doing an interview. It's not about you, it's about them. It's about the listener, it's about the guest. And the other thing that I think that radio brings, because I've done radio and television talk shows, and I like both for different reasons, but radio, and I think this applies to podcasts, radio is incredibly intimate. You are in the room with somebody, you're in somebody's ears, right, with your guest. And so that brings another aspect of it to the table that really can't be accomplished in any other medium, and it lets the listener connect more solidly to you than in any other form.
That's something that you've said. There's he's deceased now, but a broadcaster here in town in Charlotte named Jim Patterson.
Yeah, that
he was the pioneer of broadcasting here in Charlotte. He was the very first person to ever be on television in the Carolinas. And I think you know what the quote was, but it was like, the thing you have to bear in mind with the viewers or your audience is that they have invited you into their homes, or in the case of podcasting, they have invited you into
their phone,
into the earbuds, into their cars, into wherever they're listening. That they have invited you in, so you need to reciprocate and give them something worth keeping you around. And not kicking you out.
So having tough skin, being prepared. Yeah. Sounds like it's just, again, it's trying to think of something that's authentic and it's going to resonate.
Yes, having tough skin. And we haven't talked about that, because we do get listener response. And sometimes Can you believe this? It's not always nice.
Well, Mike, that's a conversation for another day.
Another time. So you just you can't let it cripple you. You be true to yourself.
Yeah. Well, we could easily stay here for another hour talking about feedback, positive, negative from the audience or anything else. But thank you again to Mike Collins and Chris Miller from Charlotte Talks for being our session speakers tonight and giving so much insight.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
And of course, for everyone out there that are wondering, well, where can I see or hear their work? You can either on air live on WFAE or in a podcast feed. You can go to wfae.org/Charlotte Talks, or you can find the Charlotte Talks podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. Even ask your smart speaker to play it for you. Of course, Mike, go ahead.
Oh, I just saw a question go. Do you ever give your questions to your guests ahead of time?
No.
Absolutely not. Ever. Never. Don't do it.
No, that ruins the authenticity of your conversation.
Yeah.
Well, I will give people broad, and here's the thing that's unique. I think unique to our show is that we book it and come up with the material, and then we hand it off to Mike, and where it goes after that is in his hands. We give broad parameters of what we expect to talk about, but never. And would you believe politicians are the ones that want to know the questions ahead of time, and we have to tell them no.
Oh, no way.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of politicians, wishing Charlotte Talks and our news team the best of luck next week as we approach the election and everything thereafter. But again, for our audience out there, thank you for your questions. We're sorry if we couldn't get through all of them, but of course, follow up with Mike and Chris and the rest of the Charlotte Talks team. You can find them on social media at Charlotte Talks and can listen to their show. A reminder to the audience.
Give a cheap plug for my Twitter if people want to reach out to me?
Of course, go right ahead.
Yeah. So I am at Chris Miller WFAE, and if I don't know if that's a website for this session that could be added. I mean, please feel free, because some of the best ideas are from people that reach out to us and say, "What do you think about this?" So
you heard it. His inbox is open. He's ready
That's
for
right.
all the
Slide
comments
on
and
in.
questions. A reminder that tonight's session is being recorded. It will be made available to everyone who registered at the end of this month, which is this Saturday. So whether you wanted to attend a previous session of the month or you want to rewatch this one, we'll find all the links and the session recordings at the end of the month. And again, get social with us, whether you're tagging Chris Miller and Charlotte Talks or you just want to share your experience tonight. You can use the hashtag CLT Podcast Fest. Again, this is the final full session of the Charlotte Podcast Festival. So thank you for attending. And of course, we hope that you support it. You can make a donation at any amount, even pick up a nice and locally printed shirt at charlottepodcastfestival.com. Tomorrow night is our happy hour. We hope to see everyone there. You can register on our website. If I don't see you then I'll just wish you the best night, the best week, the best rest of your year, and hopefully we'll see you again in podcast land. But with that said, I'm Joni Deutsch, your moderator. I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of your day and take care and talk soon. Bye, everyone.